The morning sun streamed through the windows of Police Chief Robert Martinez's office as Sarah sat across from him at his large, mahogany desk. The chief was a stern-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of decades in law enforcement. He had been the one to promote Sarah to lieutenant 3 years ago, recognizing her talent and dedication despite the resistance from some of the old guard who thought she hadn't earned it. "I've read your complaint," Chief Martinez said, tapping the papers on his desk. "Every word of it. And I've spoken with Sergeant Davis and reviewed Officer Brennan's patrol records for the past 6 months. Sarah waited silently. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy was to let others fill the silence. Martinez sighed heavily. "This isn't the first complaint about Brennan. It's not even the second or third? In the past year alone, he's had 4 complaints filed against him for excessive force, racial profiling, and unprofessional conduct. None of them stuck because the complainants either couldn't prove their cases or were convinced to drop the charges." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "So this officer has a pattern of behavior, and he's still on the streets?" "He was on the streets," Martinez corrected. "As of this morning, Officer Brennan has been suspended without pay pending a full investigation. And this time, there won't be any sweeping it under the rug. This time, he went after one of our own. And there's no way to spin that into anything other than what it was. With respect, sir, I'm not concerned that he went after one of our own. I'm concerned that he's been doing this to civilians for months, maybe years, and nobody stopped him. The fact that I have a badge shouldn't be the only reason this is taken seriously." Martinez leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're absolutely right. And that's why I'm not just suspending Brennan. I'm calling for a complete review of our traffic stop procedures and our disciplinary process. I want to know why these previous complaints didn't result in action. I want to know if there are other officers who've been operating the same way. And I want recommendations for how we prevent this from happening again. And who's going to lead this review?" Sarah asked, though she had a feeling she already knew the answer. "You are," Martinez said. "You've got the rank, the experience, and frankly, you've got the motivation. Plus, after yesterday, nobody's going to question your commitment to rooting out discrimination in this department." Sarah had expected this, but it still felt like a heavy weight settling on her shoulders. She was being asked to fix a broken system while still living and working within that system. It was exhausting just thinking about it. But she also knew that if she didn't do it, who would? Someone had to be willing to stand up and demand change, even when that change was difficult and uncomfortable. "I'll need full access to personnel files and complaint records," Sarah said. "And I'll need protection from retaliation. If I'm going to do this right, I'm going to make some people very angry." "You'll have everything you need," Martinez promised. "And you have my full support? Anyone who tries to retaliate against you will answer to me personally." They talked for another hour about the scope of the review, the timeline, and the resources Sarah would need. By the time she left the chief's office, she had a clear mandate and a mountain of work ahead of her. But she also had something else: hope. Maybe this time things really would change. Maybe Officer Brennan's mistake would be the catalyst that finally forced the department to confront its problems instead of hiding them. News of the incident spread through the department like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone knew that Officer Brennan had pulled over Lieutenant Mitchell, that he had treated her with blatant disrespect, and that he was now facing serious consequences. The reactions were mixed. Some officers were outraged on Sarah's behalf, expressing support and solidarity. Others were defensive, arguing that Brennan had simply made an honest mistake and didn't deserve to have his career destroyed. Sarah heard the whispers as she walked through the station. She saw the looks, some sympathetic and others resentful. She understood both reactions. Change was scary, especially for people who had built their careers within a system that rewarded certain behaviors and punished others. Some officers genuinely wanted to do better but didn't know how. Others resisted change because it threatened their comfortable status quo. In the cafeteria, Sarah sat down with a group of younger officers she had mentored over the years. They were a diverse group, reflecting the changing face of the department: two black women, a Latino man, an Asian woman, and a white man who had grown up in the inner city and understood the community's concerns about police conduct. "We're glad you're okay," Officer Jennifer Torres said, reaching across the table to squeeze Sarah's hand. "When we heard what happened, we were so angry." "I'm fine," Sarah assured them. "I'm more concerned about all the people Brennan pulled over who didn't have a badge to protect them. How many traffic stops has he done based on nothing but the color of someone's skin? How many people has he harassed or intimidated?" "Too many," Officer Marcus Johnson said grimly. "I've heard stories about him. Some of the community leaders have complained about aggressive stops in predominantly black neighborhoods, but nobody would go on record because they were afraid of retaliation." Sarah nodded. This was the heart of the problem. Police departments operated with so much power and so little oversight that people were afraid to speak up even when they were clearly being wronged. And officers like Brennan exploited that fear, knowing that most of his victims would never file a complaint. "That's going to change," Sarah said firmly. "I'm leading a review of our traffic stop procedures and complaint process. I need your help. All of you. I need you to talk to people in the community, encourage them to come forward with their stories. I need you to be honest with me about what you've seen and heard, even if it implicates other officers. Can you do that?" They all nodded, their faces serious. These were good cops, the kind who had joined the force because they genuinely wanted to help people. They represented the future Sarah was fighting for. A department where integrity and accountability mattered more than protecting the Brotherhood of Blue. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into the review. She interviewed dozens of officers and civilians, reviewed hundreds of traffic stop reports, and analyzed patterns in the data. What she found was disturbing but not surprising. Officers like Brennan weren't anomalies. They were products of a system that prioritized arrests and citations over community relations, that rewarded aggressive policing over problem solving, and that protected officers who crossed the line as long as they closed cases. The data showed clear racial disparities in traffic stops, searches, and use of force. Black and Latino drivers were stopped at rates far exceeding their percentage of the population. They were searched more often, even though searches of white drivers were more likely to find contraband. They were subjected to force more frequently, even in situations that didn't warrant it. Sarah compiled all of this into a comprehensive report with specific recommendations. She called for mandatory bias training for all officers, stricter oversight of traffic stops, a civilian review board with real authority to investigate complaints, and clear consequences for officers who engaged in racial profiling. She knew the recommendations would be controversial. Some people would argue they went too far, others that they didn't go far enough. But she believed they were a necessary first step. Meanwhile, Officer Brennan's disciplinary hearing was scheduled. As the complainant, Sarah was required to testify. She arrived at the hearing room early, dressed in her full uniform with her lieutenant's bars gleaming on her collar. The room was packed with officers, union representatives, and department brass. The atmosphere was tense, everyone aware that this hearing could set important precedents for how the department handled future misconduct cases. Brennan sat at a table with his union lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit who had built her career defending police officers against discipline. He looked older than he had during the traffic stop, his face haggard and his eyes hollow. Sarah almost felt sorry for him, but then she remembered his sneer when he asked if she cleaned offices, his hand on his weapon as if she posed a threat, his absolute certainty that he had the right to treat her with contempt. The hearing officer, a captain from a neighboring jurisdiction brought in to ensure impartiality, called the session to order. Sarah was the first witness. She took the stand and repeated her account of the traffic stop, answering questions from both the hearing officer and Brennan's lawyer. The lawyer tried to poke holes in her story, suggesting that Brennan had legitimate concerns about her vehicle, that the stop was routine, that any disrespect was unintentional. Sarah remained calm and factual throughout the cross-examination. She didn't need to exaggerate or embellish. The facts were damning enough on their own. Brennan had pulled her over without cause. He had searched her vehicle without consent or probable cause. He had made racist assumptions and treated her with clear disrespect. No amount of legal maneuvering could change those basic truths. Sergeant Davis testified next, confirming Sarah's account and adding his own observations about Brennan's behavior. Officer Brennan stood motionless on the side of the road, still holding the police uniform in his trembling hands. The weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a physical thing. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Sarah watched him with a calm expression, though inside her emotions swirled like a storm. Years of training and discipline kept her face neutral, kept her from showing the anger and hurt that threatened to overwhelm her. "I think you should call this in," Sarah said quietly. "Let your supervisor know what's happening here." Brennan's face had gone pale beneath his summer tan. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead that had nothing to do with the heat. "Listen, I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Sarah interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an edge now. "You made assumptions based on what you saw. A black woman driving through this neighborhood must be up to no good, is that it?" "That's not what I—" "Then what was it, Officer Brennan? Why did you pull me over? What was your probable cause?" Brennan's mouth worked silently. They both knew he had none. He had pulled her over because of her skin color, plain and simple. Everything that followed had been an attempt to justify that initial prejudice. Sarah took a step forward, and Brennan actually flinched. She held out her hand. "I'll take my uniform back now." He handed it over quickly, as if the fabric had become too hot to hold. Sarah draped it carefully over her arm, smoothing out the wrinkles his rough handling had created. This uniform meant something to her. It represented 2 decades of service, of fighting for a community that often didn't appreciate her efforts, of breaking through barriers that shouldn't have existed in the first place. "You're going to call your supervisor," Sarah said again. It wasn't a request this time. "You're going to explain exactly what happened here, and then we're going to sort this out properly. Do you understand?" Brennan nodded, his earlier swagger completely gone. He walked back to his patrol car on unsteady legs and reached through the window for his radio. Sarah could hear his voice, low and urgent, as he spoke to dispatch. She couldn't make out the words, but she could imagine them. He would try to downplay what had happened, try to make it sound like a simple misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding here. There was only prejudice and abuse of power. Within minutes, another patrol car appeared, followed closely by a supervisor's vehicle. The supervisor was Sergeant Davis, a black man in his 50s who Sarah knew well. They had worked together on several cases over the years, and he had always shown her respect. His face was grave as he stepped out of his car and approached. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, his voice formal. "I received a call about an incident. Can you tell me what happened?" Sarah explained the situation calmly and precisely, sticking to the facts. She described the traffic stop, the lack of probable cause, the search of her vehicle without consent, and Officer Brennan's assumption that her police uniform was stolen. She didn't embellish or exaggerate. She didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. Sergeant Davis listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Sarah finished, he turned to Officer Brennan, who stood beside his patrol car looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. "Is this accurate, Officer Brennan?" Davis asked. Brennan hesitated, then nodded miserably. "Yes, sir. But I didn't know she was—" "That's not a defense," Davis cut him off sharply. "Whether she's a police officer or a civilian, you had no right to pull her over without cause. You had no right to search her vehicle. And you certainly had no right to treat her with such disrespect." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "We both know why you pulled her over, don't we?" Brennan's face flushed red. He stared at his boots, unable to meet the sergeant's eyes. Davis turned back to Sarah. "Lieutenant, I apologize on behalf of the department. This is unacceptable, and it will be dealt with appropriately. I need to ask if you want to file a formal complaint." Sarah had been thinking about this question since the moment Brennan had pulled her over. Part of her wanted to file the complaint to make sure this officer faced consequences for his actions. But another part of her was simply tired. Tired of fighting, tired of proving herself, tired of being treated like a suspect in her own community. She thought about her daughter waiting at home, about the dinner that still needed to be cooked, about the normal evening she had been looking forward to. But then she thought about all the other people who looked like her, who didn't have a badge to protect them, who got pulled over by officers like Brennan and had no recourse. She thought about the teenagers who got stopped and searched for no reason, about the families who had to have the talk with their children about how to survive a police encounter. She thought about all the times she had heard, "I didn't know," as an excuse for treating someone as less than human. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "I want to file a formal complaint. I want a full investigation. And I want Officer Brennan to face disciplinary action." Sergeant Davis nodded. "I'll make sure it happens. For now, you're free to go. Again, I'm sorry this happened to you." Sarah got back into her car, carefully hanging her uniform in the back seat again. She started the engine and pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind her. In her rearview mirror, she could see Sergeant Davis talking sternly to Officer Brennan, his gestures sharp and angry. Whatever conversation they were having, she knew it wouldn't be pleasant for the younger officer. The drive home took only 8 more minutes, but it felt longer. Sarah's hands shook slightly on the steering wheel as the adrenaline from the encounter finally began to fade. She had maintained her composure during the confrontation, had kept her cool and handled everything by the book. But now, in the privacy of her car, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, her forehead resting on the steering wheel. The house lights were on, warm and welcoming through the windows. She could see movement inside, probably her daughter moving around in the kitchen. The normalcy of it all made her want to cry. She just wanted to be a person coming home from work, nothing more complicated than that. But in this country, in this city, even with her rank and her badge, she couldn't even drive through her own neighborhood without being treated like a criminal. Finally, Sarah took a deep breath and got out of the car. She grabbed her uniform and her purse and walked to the front door. Her daughter Maya met her in the hallway. The 15-year-old took one look at her mother's face and frowned. "Mom? What's wrong?" Sarah forced a smile. "Nothing, baby. Just had a long day." "How was school?" Maya wasn't fooled. She had inherited her mother's sharp instincts. "Something happened." "Tell me." So Sarah did. She sat down at the kitchen table with her daughter and explained what had happened, leaving out the parts that would cause too much worry, but including enough that Maya would understand. As she spoke, she watched her daughter's face cycle through shock, anger, and sadness. These were emotions no teenager should have to feel when hearing about their parents' day at work. "But you're okay?" Maya asked when Sarah finished. "He didn't hurt you?" "I'm okay," Sarah assured her. "And I filed a complaint. This officer will face consequences for what he did." "Will it matter, though?" Maya asked, her voice small. "Will it actually change anything?" The question hit Sarah harder than anything Officer Brennan had said, because Maya was right to be skeptical. How many complaints had been filed over the years? How many officers had faced consequences that amounted to little more than a slap on the wrist? The system was broken, and they both knew it. But Sarah couldn't let her daughter lose hope entirely. "I don't know if it will change everything," Sarah said honestly. "But it might change something. And sometimes that's enough reason to keep trying." They made dinner together, and the familiar rhythm of chopping vegetables and stirring pots helped ease some of the tension from Sarah's shoulders. They talked about Maya's classes, about an upcoming test, about the boy Maya had a crush on. Normal things, safe things. Things that had nothing to do with prejudice or power or the color of anyone's skin. But later that night, after Maya had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone in her home office and began writing her official complaint. She documented everything in careful detail, from the initial traffic stop to Officer Brennan's final attempt at an apology. She included the lack of probable cause, the illegal search, the racist assumptions, and the disrespectful treatment. When she finished, the document was 5 pages long. She read through it twice, making sure every word was accurate, then sent it to the Internal Affairs Division with copies to the police chief and the mayor's office. She had done this before, filed complaints about officers who stepped out of line, who forgot that their job was to protect and serve all citizens equally. Sometimes those complaints led to real change. More often, they disappeared into bureaucratic black holes, never to be seen again. But Sarah kept filing them anyway, because it was the right thing to do. Because someone had to stand up and say that this behavior was unacceptable. Because silence was complicity, and she refused to be complicit in her own oppression. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sergeant Davis. Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Chief wants. The summer heat pressed down on the streets of Riverside like a heavy blanket. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell sat in her silver sedan at the traffic light, her windows rolled down to catch any hint of a breeze. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at the police headquarters downtown, where she worked as one of the highest-ranking officers in the department. Her uniform hung in the back seat, carefully pressed and ready for tomorrow. Right now, she wore simple jeans and a white t-shirt, her natural hair pulled back in a ponytail. All she wanted was to get home, kick off her shoes, and spend a quiet evening with her daughter. The light turned green, and Sarah pressed the gas pedal gently. Her car moved forward through the intersection, staying well within the speed limit. She had always been a careful driver, even more so now that she had risen through the ranks of the police force. She knew the laws inside and out, and she followed them to the letter. It was part of who she was, both on duty and off. Behind her, she noticed a patrol car in her rearview mirror. The white vehicle with its distinctive blue and red lights sat 2 cars back, moving with the flow of traffic. Sarah thought nothing of it at first. Police cars were a common sight in this part of town, especially during the evening hours when people were heading home from work. She continued driving, her mind already on the chicken she planned to cook for dinner and the homework she needed to help her daughter complete. 2 blocks later, the patrol car suddenly accelerated. Its lights flashed on, bright and urgent against the fading daylight. The siren gave a short whoop that made Sarah's heart jump. She glanced in her mirror again, expecting the vehicle to speed past her to chase someone else. But instead, the patrol car pulled directly behind her, its lights reflecting off her mirrors in dizzying patterns of red and blue. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She had been pulled over before, though not in many years. Each time, despite her badge and her rank, she felt the same anxiety that so many people in her community experienced. She took a deep breath, reminded herself of who she was and what she represented, and carefully guided her car to the side of the road. She came to a complete stop, put the vehicle in park, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. The patrol car stopped behind her, its lights still flashing. Sarah watched in her side mirror as the driver's door opened. A white officer stepped out, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a crew cut and sunglasses that hid his eyes. His name tag read Officer Brennan, though Sarah couldn't make out his first name from this distance. He walked toward her car with a swagger that Sarah recognized immediately. She had seen it before in officers who let their authority go to their heads, who forgot that the badge was meant to serve, not to dominate. Officer Brennan approached her window and leaned down slightly. His face was hard, his jaw set in a line that suggested he had already decided something about her before speaking a single word. Sarah could smell the coffee on his breath and see the sweat stains under his arms. He had been on patrol for a while, she guessed, probably looking for reasons to make stops and write tickets to meet some quota. "License and registration," he said without greeting, without explanation. His voice was flat and cold, lacking any of the professional courtesy that officers were trained to use during traffic stops. Sarah kept her voice calm and respectful. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why you pulled me over?" Brennan's jaw tightened. "I said license and registration, now?" Sarah felt a flash of irritation but pushed it down. She knew this game. She had seen it played out too many times, both as a victim and as an observer. Some officers, particularly those who carried their own prejudices like weapons, didn't like to be questioned. They expected immediate compliance, especially from people who looked like her. "Of course," Sarah said evenly. "I'm going to reach into my glove compartment to get my registration, and then I'll get my license from my purse. Is that okay?" Brennan stepped back slightly, his hand moving closer to his weapon. "Move slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Sarah's heart hammered harder, but she forced herself to move with deliberate care. She reached across to the glove compartment, opened it, and pulled out the registration card. She placed it on the dashboard, then slowly reached for her purse on the passenger seat. Her fingers found her wallet, and she extracted her driver's license. She handed both documents through the window to Officer Brennan. He snatched them from her hand and studied the license with narrowed eyes. "Sarah Mitchell," he read aloud, his tone suggesting he found something suspicious about the name itself. "This your current address?" "Yes, sir. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Sarah blinked. "I'm driving home from work. I live about 10 minutes from here." "Work," Brennan repeated, as if the word itself was questionable. "What kind of work?" This was the moment. Sarah could feel it hanging in the air between them. She could tell him she was a police lieutenant, that she outranked him by 3 grades, that she had 20 years of service and commanded respect from everyone at the department. But something in his attitude, in the way he had approached this entire stop, made her hesitate. She wanted to see how far this would go. She wanted to understand what was really happening here. "I work downtown," she said simply, not lying but not offering the complete truth either. Brennan's lip curled slightly. "Downtown. Doing what? Cleaning offices?" The insult hung in the air between them like poison gas. Sarah felt her hands tighten on the steering wheel, her knuckles going white with the effort of maintaining her composure. She had faced discrimination before, countless times, throughout her career. She had been passed over for promotions, questioned about her qualifications, and subjected to jokes and comments that her white colleagues never had to endure. But she had persevered. She had worked twice as hard, proven herself 3 times over, and risen to a position of authority through sheer determination and excellence. And now, sitting in her own car on a public street, she was being treated like a criminal by an officer who wouldn't have lasted a week under her command. "I'm going to ask you again," Sarah said. Her voice steadied despite the anger burning in her chest. "Why did you pull me over?" "I wasn't speeding. My tags are current. My lights are working. What is the reason for this stop?" Brennan's face darkened. "I'll ask the questions here. Step out of the vehicle. On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I'm telling you to." "Now get out of the car before I drag you out." Sarah's mind raced. She knew her rights. She knew the law better than this officer probably ever would. But she also knew how these situations could escalate, how quickly a routine traffic stop could turn deadly for someone who looked like her. She had seen the videos, read the reports, attended the funerals of people who had done nothing wrong but still ended up dead because an officer felt threatened or disrespected. Slowly, deliberately, she opened her car door and stepped out onto the pavement. The heat from the asphalt rose up through her sneakers. She stood straight, her hands visible at her sides, her expression neutral. Brennan circled around her, looking her up and down like she was merchandise he was considering purchasing. "What's in the car?" he asked. "Personal belongings." "My work uniform in the back seat." "Work uniform," he repeated mockingly. "Let me guess, fast food?" Sarah didn't answer. She focused on her breathing, on staying calm, on not giving him any excuse to escalate this further. "I'm going to search your vehicle," Brennan announced. "Do you have probable cause?" Sarah asked. His hand moved to his weapon. "I have all the cause I need. You were driving erratically, and I have reason to believe there may be illegal substances in your vehicle." Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She hadn't been driving erratically. There were no illegal substances in her car. This was pure harassment, nothing more and nothing less. But she also knew that arguing wouldn't help. It would only make things worse. "I do not consent to a search," she said clearly, making sure her words were on record if Brennan was wearing a body camera. "But I will not physically resist." Brennan smirked, as if her lack of consent was exactly what he wanted to hear. He walked to her car and began rifling through it, opening the glove compartment again, searching under the seats, pulling out the contents of her center console. He found nothing, of course, because there was nothing to find. But that didn't seem to matter to him. Then he turned his attention to the back seat. His hand reached for the uniform hanging there, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The moment he saw that uniform, saw the lieutenant's insignia on the collar, this entire encounter would shift. But she still didn't speak. She wanted to see what he would do, how far his prejudice would take him. Brennan grabbed the uniform and pulled it out through the door. He held it up, squinting at it in the fading light. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then his eyes widened slightly as he registered what he was looking at. The dark navy fabric, the pressed creases, the silver bars on the collar that designated rank. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing some of its aggressive edge. "My work uniform," Sarah repeated. "As I told you." Brennan looked from the uniform to Sarah and back again. She could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the slow realization of what he had done. But instead of back in,